Welcome everybody to Oregon State University's Permaculture Design Pro class. We are the winter spring 2023, 20, or we are, pardon me, we are the winter spring 2024 class. And this is our second office hour. Nice to see everybody here. Uh, just before we start, I'm just curious how the class is going for everybody. We're into 2 weeks. We've submitted at least one assignment. We're coming up to base maps. How's everybody finding the course? How are we feeling? What's the general sentiment? You can feel free to unmute or throw yourself in the chat, either or. It's like we have some people typing. Well, I'll also add in, it's been really great. This is the first year we've done the Basemap Clinics, and it's been fun for me because I've gotten a chance to get to know the rest of the class at large. And nice to kind of go through that process again. And have had some really great questions over this past weekend, and I think we're gonna run a couple more this coming week. So if you are looking for some more base map conversations, that's awesome. Belkis, thoroughly enjoying the class. That's awesome. Dan, yeah, Dan, nice to see you. So far, so good. The base map has been the most fun thus far. It's getting into the work beyond the initial research, right? Yeah. I think I think because we are a class that really focuses on working with the data that is, and giving folks a sense of how to go about that. I think that first week's assignment can be a little surprising to folks, but that's the permaculture long, thoughtful, protracted observation. So yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks. Anybody else want to chime in how the class is going? Thoughts? Chana learned a lot thus far, had issues with elevation data for Sri Lankan. Yeah, no doubts. Yeah, so basically, if we don't have any local data that's of high grade value, then we can always go back to that contour map generator and it'll give us a little bit of data. Again, I've talked about this before, but that data, all Google Earth Pro data and all Google Earth data is from what's called the Shuttle Radar Topographic Mission, SRTM, from 2000, where NASA flew a shuttle around the planet, shot a laser via LiDAR, and got topographic information. But unfortunately, the pixel size was 30 meters. So if your site is less than 30 meters of elevation change or 100 feet, which most of us are, then it was suggested. So it can be pretty off for most of our conversations. All right. Well, we only have one question today, so we'll see how we go. If anybody else has other questions, they can always put it into the question and answer document, which I will put into the chat now. And if not, what we'll do is we'll run through the upcoming assignments and we'll go through it that way. All right. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so from Erica, hey Javin, I wonder if you could elaborate a bit more about permaculture in the cities, towns, built environments. With permaculture, we often talk about degraded landscapes. We design and turn them into regenerative farms, landscapes, gardens. The ultimate degradation of an ecosystem after a landfall or otherwise chemically polluted land must be the cities. The trouble being that we can't remove the destructive objects like roads and houses and sewage systems and other large-scale infrastructure. Are there any known permaculture projects that have success in cities more than small school projects and home gardens? Any projects where the local or regional councils has been taking the initiative? There are many rural large projects, but in the cities, we may all love the nature and countryside feeling that we want to help healing, but what can permaculture really do in the overcrowded and even growing and polluting cities? How can it be approached? When I started thinking about this, my brain stops. It's too difficult, but isn't it essential for people care and to give hope to people, especially the children whom we are constantly scaring off with doomsday talk and climate change? Love to hear your reflections and also from fellow students. Yeah, so if anybody has anything they want to add, they can throw in the document or in the chat. But I guess I was a little surprised by your question because I started learning about permaculture when I was living in towns and cities. versus broad acre, be it, farms, large scale holdings, restoration projects. So my experience was permaculture in the city first and foremost. And I found it to be a plethora of different types of scales and scopes and different types of people involved in different projects. So what I can say is that from a systematic approach, Rob Hopkins wanted to apply permaculture to a town, Totnes, Totnes, and during PDC that he was teaching, and came up with this idea of transition towns, which was basically energy descent coupled with how do we localize everything from our entertainment to our sourcing of food and water and interaction and even our sense of well-being. And so Transition Towns was born, and it's an incredible organization that really focuses on a systematic way to go through form a transition towns group. So if there isn't one in your local area, you could be the first to start it, and then to slowly go through the process of looking at different areas within that town to slowly work towards sometimes some type of transition towards more local personscape, slow food, slow living conversation. And there are hundreds of examples through there. So I have put his link towards transition towns down here for you to take a look at. The second thing is that there's almost without fail in all the major Canadian cities that have had permaculture people who are there and excited. There's been gleaning projects. So gleaning projects are basically mapping projects that take a look at all the old fruit trees or bushes within the city, and then reaches out to the individuals who own those bushes or trees and says, "Hey, we'd like to harvest your bush or tree, and we'd like to give 10% back to you if you want it. But we'll have people here, we'll coordinate with you, we'll come." And then sometimes an offshoot of that is then you have a tool share with things like apple presses or grinders or fermenters, where individuals come together within that harvest to then process that harvest together and work within that harvest for the good of the community or the people that come together, which then leads to permaculture guilds. So having a guild is basically one person raising their hand saying, "Hey, I want to gather everybody to talk about this thing called permaculture." And I've been a part of now 3 different guilds, one in Calgary, one in Victoria, actually 4, one in Mid-Island, Vancouver Island, and then one in Vernon. And basically, they usually meet once a month. They come together. There's usually a presentation, or there's a topic, or there's a workshop. And we in Vernon, the 2 people who created it was Gord Hebert and Jana McNabb. Of before they changed, it was Element Eco Design or Eco Element Design. And they did an amazing job of gathering everybody, being consistent, hosting at the local library, which gave them space. The library would pull out all the permaculture books. Everybody would then the boring would go up, which is the win for the library. It also supported the library to create a tool lending library and a seed library where people could take out seeds, grow them for the year, come back, bring back those seeds after a year of growth. Which is kind of another thing altogether, is having a seed library, which a number of folks can do. And then once we move out of that, we can get to community scale projects, which are, conventional community gardens, or doing more perennial community gardens, things like food forests. So within Victoria, there's a gentleman named Jeff who had put together Spring Ridge Commons, which is an incredible example of urban agriculture, and just did a brilliant job of bringing that in. And then in Seattle, Beacon Hill Food Forest, and there's tons in Detroit. There's so many of these small scale projects. Hard to know where each one of them is. In terms of councils taking initiative, basically, you have to think about it from a personal perspective or directive. If the old guard, let's say, or the people who are still thinking that oil is forever and our anthropomorphic disruption of our ecosystem doesn't have consequences, then generally those people are not going to change. Sometimes they'll have an end of suburbia moment, but rarely. And so usually it takes somebody who says, "Okay, I'm going to work to become part of that council and then work to change the conversation around that." And that's a great example of Gordon and Barrett of eco-sense.ca. Fantastic site. They grow roughly 80 to 90% of their own food and vegetables and meat. And they got onto council and then started to change things from inside. In fact, Gord was part of the group that put together the gray water and composting toilets legislation, which is now in legislation in British Columbia. So part of it is not waiting for the change to happen, but being part of the change at the level that you want to. I've never wanted to step into politics. I've never wanted to tell other people how to live. So that's not for me. For other people, it is. It's just not my bag. I've been in positions of leadership before, and I've learned that for me, servant leadership is the best way. I'm invited to lead, and I tell everybody whenever people are done with me having to lead, great. I'm happy to go about and do my business. So there's a lot of examples of that from point to point, especially through transition towns. Permablitzes we didn't talk about. So permablitzes were created by my late friend and colleague Dan Palmer, and then his business partner Adam Grubb. And basically, it started spontaneously, where, and I forget what country, it was a Latin American country, in their native town of Melbourne, Australia. They'd start to get to know these people. They'd walk by one day, and it was kind of the grandmother of the neighborhood, and people would always be there. But they had such a close connection to food, but there wasn't this sense of being able to cultivate food. And Dan came saying, "Hey, I know how to transform a yard. I know how to produce food. Why don't we do this thing called permaculture here?" And so they made up the word permablitz, which is a portmanteau of permaculture and blitzkrieg, so lightning fast permaculture, where everyone comes together. They transform the site in a day, and basically that's the main piece. And then there's different sort of structures that can come around it. When we created the Southern Vancouver Island Permablitz Network, Taylor Krawcheck of Hatchet and Seed Contracting, myself, we basically had a whole website, and then we had a back end where you could host a permablitz, and once you participated in 3 permablitzes, you were then eligible to host one. Usually the person would pay for the design from the designer. They would pay for the materials. People would come and work for free. As designers and installers, we would then do small workshops throughout the day. Usually the person hosting would feed everybody. Sometimes it was potluck. And it was great. It was a great way to transform. I'd also be remiss not to talk about Mark Lakeman and his exceptional work with City Repair, which was, from my perspective of your question, is exactly what we're talking about, which was, how can we re-village our cities? How can we start to make them places instead of just locations and just spaces? And so within City Repair, he's done a huge amount of work with intersection repair, where people get together, they reclaim the intersections for the community. They put up 24-hour tea stations and 24-hour book stations and little places to sit that aren't there just for bus pickup or for anything to do with the city, but specifically within that area, to be in that area. They also usually do a big block party, and they paint the intersection. And then a lot of these things happen throughout what's called the Village Building Convergence, which is a concentration of events like this that happen once a year that really exemplify what placemaking and village building is all about. Mark and I are actually in the works to create a course on this whole conversation about re-villaging the city. Really looking forward to that course. It's probably a year away, but we're getting there. Before Mark, there was people like Brad Lancaster who worked on doing what cities now called low impact developments, where basically they take the water that's coming down the curbside in a road. They basically, with some civil courage and no permission, cut into the gutter, the curb, brought the water into a basin, and then basically developed a mesquite forest, a mini forest, cooling the sidewalk, increasing the moisture retention. And then they had, and still have, a yearly festival where they harvest the mesquite, they turn it into flour, they turn it into products, and they have this entire collection and conversation. The next thing to talk about is the LET system. And so we did this on Salt Spring for a while, where basically there are hours in a bank, so to speak, where you basically do something for somebody within this group, and then you have X amount of hours within that LET system. That LET system then allows somebody else to pay back or to use those hours as they put hours into the system. And again, it's a way of localizing value trade without including currency. So I think you've probably heard this. The dollar spent locally has upwards of $8, $9, $10 in terms of value, as opposed to a dollar that's spent buying something from Amazon. So this is a a step further in that conversation. And then as I started to research, because it's, I don't know if you did this in Google, but it's hard to put it into Google without finding thousands of results. But there's these super cool little hubs, and I just found this Barcelona Nest City Lab, which is really about a demonstration site, but also a hosting site, bringing everyone together, having that conversation, being part of that conversation, sharing information. So this was a great example that I had never seen before, which I was pretty stoked to look through. And then two books that come readily to mind was my friend and colleague, my late friend and colleague, Toby Hemingway's The Permaculture City. So talking about how do we work permaculture at a city level. And then recently, David Holmgren, also a friend and colleague, the co-founder of Permaculture, Retro Suburbia, fantastic book, talking about downshifting guide to a resilient future, really talking about energy descent. How do we localize and be part of a community? And then the last thing I would say is that there are community groups that are more about preparation, more about seeing that the infrastructure that we have built has not been maintained at the level necessary for exponential, infinite growth. And so there's a number of groups I've been a part of over the years that have a sense of this, depending on their bent. Sometimes they're religious in nature, and I'm not, but we both, it's kind of like me and the Mormons. Me and the Mormons see eye to eye when it comes to food security, which is great. It's a departure point of dialogue. But being part of these groups has been a great boon to me because I've been able to share what I know, learn what I don't, and then make more connections, more community, more conversation. So funny enough, we actually just all met with our community last Thursday talking about just this, about food growing, creating more abundance, and being together. The other book, which I might recommend, which I'll find a link for eventually here, but is The City Forest, Forest by P.A. Yeomans. P.A. Yeomans created the keyline design process, which most people just know from keyline plowing, but it's an entire farm design process, which people should really start to get a sense of because it's not just the plowing, but it's a brilliant book that is very innovative and looks at it from a very large perspective. And then I guess the other thing is that there's so many different communities like what is it called? Davis Village Homes, where in California, I'll put this down here as an example as well, and we'll find a link for it. If somebody wants to find it while I'm talking, that'd be great. Davis Village Homes. The story of this is incredible, where this architect really wanted to take so much of what the city forest was doing and do it in real time. So this is an entire neighborhood that had agriculture built into it, where the sideways, the laneways all had food. All the homes had equal access to solar real estate, the way that they were structured. There were some larger areas that were made for larger agriculture. And I've been a part of a number of these processes. Now that I'm talking about, there's so many other examples. Jack Anderson of Anderson Designs approached me a couple of years ago. He wanted to recreate a type of agricultural zoning within the agricultural land reserve within British Columbia, the ALR, and wanted to do it in such a way so that way you could take what normally is in the ALR, which is two buildings, but instead do agri neighborhoods and develop entire neighborhoods that are about this idea about developing from the get-go and densifying to be able to use ALR land, which is set aside for agricultural work. But if the intent of the development was really about agriculture, and this is the thing, you're going to become specialized in one area. And while I teach this course and I have connections with individuals who do this type of work, I probably know half a percent. So, I probably don't really know. Thank you, anonymous, whoever you are, anonymous shrew. Thank you. Bravo. Well done. And there's so much more to look at and create and understand. One of the things that Toby really taught me was if you don't have a zone 5, 4, 3, maybe even 2 within your site, think of the city as a 2 to 5. And I worked with a colleague once who had a plot in a community garden, and that was his zone 3. And they kind of got mad at him because he would go and he would plant his potatoes there. And they were kind of miffed because they wanted more connection. And once you plant your potatoes, you don't really go back much. You kind of check the weather, see if you're getting enough rain. If not, go and water your potatoes. But because he didn't have that space locally on his site, he would then go to that area to do so. And similarly, individuals I've worked with and also students when we were teaching the family food security course, which is on regenerative living, about food security and sovereignty and mapping out your food shed. So where does your food come from? When we got to the lesson and the module about wild harvest and wild crafting, we would then invite people to look around their neighborhoods, look around their areas and see where wild crafting could happen, wild harvest. And so that became a part of their food shed as well. So I think I've talked long enough about this. I'm sure there's other people who would like to share some examples, but it would be great to hear if anybody else had anything else they wanted to share. But it's a great question. Thanks, Erica. And thanks so much for putting in the URL. That's awesome.
Thank you very much, Javan. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, because I don't know what's wrong with my computer, but so I can almost hear everything you say.
Okay.
No, because within the field where I work, I live in a small municipality, so I deal with drinking water and sewage treatment, and also we call it day water, but it's run water,
Stormwater.
rainwater catchment. And when I go to the more regional workshops and educations, I see how there is a lot of knowledge, but there is like this permaculture piece or this regenerative piece that is lacking. And those people there are in a way quite influential. And so that's why I'm thinking they're not politicians, they're like, what do you call them? Civil servants, or like they're working within the administrations, but still they are the one that are influencing what is at the end being done. The politicians, they say fix this, and they are the ones who are going to decide what is to be done.
Yeah.
And therefore this is a field of interest for me, because I feel that if it's like they're like really close to it, but it's just that this little piece missing. And I can feel that permaculture, it would sort of, because they are really highly qualified within all different kinds of fields. But I think that the perspective that permaculture offers can just turn all these things around and really give them the power in the right direction. So that's why I think this is interesting. And in Sweden, people are really busy, and if they have some extra time, they spend it with their children, taking them to different sports. So this community thing is very weak in Sweden. And that's why I'm thinking about this other perspective as well.
That's
but
wonderful.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting to hear your perspective, because you have a lot of experience.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I think of when I think of permaculture, and the reason why permaculture I think has been so powerful is that in a similar way, when you have wind spread seed, you come to a course like this, all of you are from different places, different contexts, different situations. You become inspired by something within it. And maybe it's like low tech or low impact developments, which are these curb cuts that bring stormwater, daylit water into a basin, which then feeds a small garden, a boulevard garden. And what's amazing about that is that all of you are like little seeds that, during the course, after the course, maybe long after the course, depending on your time and experience and all the rest of it, you have the ability to plant yourself or plant the ideas in your local area. And sometimes that's just hosting a little conversation. Sometimes that's starting a full permaculture guild. Sometimes that's hosting just movie nights. That's how I started. I didn't want to host conversations because I was just out of a PDC. I didn't know enough to teach, but I knew enough to host a movie. I knew how to plug in a projector and press play. I knew how to say, what did everybody think about it, and have a conversation. So that's where I started, to the point to where when I started being involved with the Victoria Permaculture Guild, I started hosting these permaculture porn nights, which is where everybody would come and share the photos of what they were doing. And the title was to be provocative, to get people to come. And we had this great evening where everyone just showed photos of their projects and just shared what they knew, and shared the bounty of the gardens, and shared the fermentations they were making. And for me, when I started, I knew I wanted to be involved from an income generating perspective because I had somehow I gotten into my head, life is long, and why should I go and work for somebody and do something I don't want to do? Which was a crazy poverty inducing way to go about life when I could have gone engineering or could have gone programming and all the rest of it. But what it did teach me very quickly is that I needed to create some kind of income. So I created an education company. So I brought in educators to then disseminate information that either A, wasn't well distributed in my area or wasn't in my area at all. There's this great saying, the future's here, it's just unevenly distributed. And that's the case for everything. It's usually towards technology, but it's also for any sort of social movements that we have. And so it's really up to us to, in our areas, to raise the permaculture flag and say, anybody else want to chat? Anybody else want to get together? Anybody else want to make a cob oven with me? And what happens is it grows like that, just like little bacterial fungal colonies. We grow slowly as pioneers. And if you are a pioneer, you have to be pernicious. You have to be persistent. Sometimes you have to be a little prickly, hopefully not too poisonous, but you have to have some staying power, some civil courage, like Sepp Holzer talks about, to be able to establish yourself. And then there's that consistency piece. And this is one of the main issues, is that if you don't have consistency, it's hard for people to think that there's continuity. So each of us that have been at this more than a decade, and I think at 15, 16 years now, at times we persisted in being the local voice that would raise a hand and say, hey, I want to talk about this. And we went early, we set up chairs. We had 2 people show up for the first one. We saw that blossom to sometimes 100 people that came for an event. But that's, I think, incumbent upon all of us to work in whatever ways we can where we are with the problems that we see. So start where you are with what you have and grow from there, because that's where everything starts. So thanks. Thanks for giving me the chance to chat about it. It's been fun.
Thank you.
Okay, well, what do we got in the chat going on? Andreas, amazing answer. So many beautiful examples. Thank you. Dan, appreciated the links in Google Doc. That was really helpful overview. So this is a great example. If I get a question early, and this, I started on this last night, I can pour everything I have into it. If you give me a question 2 minutes before the class, I'm just going to talk about it. I don't have time to do all that research. So just think of it like this. If you have a question, a ponderance that comes up during the 2 weeks between office hours, feel free to pop over, type it in there. Don't worry about it. I'll check on it. I can build the answer to a more complete value with time. So cool. All right. So I'm not seeing any more questions. Is there anything that's popped up for anybody as we've been going through that? Small, big, large? Listen, I was here in 2009. I was taking my PDC. I didn't know anything, anything. I remember asking a question like, sorry, what do you mean ephemeral? Like just basic questions. So know that this is one of the safer places and the safer persons you could ask questions of. Maybe there's something that you think is totally bunk within permaculture that you want to bring up. So just know that you can ask any question under the sun. I don't mind at all. Gives me an opportunity to wax poetic on it. But if there isn't anything, then I'm going to pop over to the template and we're going to chat about that.
Yeah. Can I just
Hey, Erica. Yeah, go ahead.
ask one thing? Can I ask one thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
No. Yeah.
Erica, go ahead.
I am thinking about the home zone, the zone 0. Can you hear me? No?
Yep, we can hear you.
Someone hear me? You can hear me? Okay, I'll try again. Perhaps this is not for now, but I'm just wondering if we will we, we will be so late in the course.
Hey, Erica, I think we're back. So I see you've typed in, perhaps not for now, but I wonder if we will talk about zone zero later on in the course. And I'm guessing you're speaking about um, the person, because usually, or are you talking about the house? Depends on your definition.
The house, the
Ah,
house.
the house.
Uh, do you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more the house because I feel in cold climate, uh, it's a big part because you need somewhere to store your harvest. And when I did my design years back, I sort of completely missed that, and it has caused me a lot of problem. So,
Yeah.
will that be something we talk about later?
You know,
That's my main question.
I don't think it's a formal part of the course, but it's a brilliant part to bring in. And I'm happy to chat about it. I'm happy to talk about any questions or conversations you have. What specifically about zone zero interests you, or in terms of a design approach, are you curious about?
Oh, well, um, I have a smaller garden, but I can grow a lot of food, but I don't have much storage. And then there are different techniques, but they all, well, they say some of the things you can just leave like leek, you can leave them out for the winter. But really, when you have 1 meter of snow, you don't go out to harvest some leek. And well, at least I don't. Um, and well, things like that, because it
Sure.
and also with permaculture, I think the permaculture thing is the design part of it, but in order to then use your design and work your design, you need like plenty of skills. And
Mhm.
I didn't have them all, and I still don't.
Yeah, it's a great point. Yeah, so I could talk a little bit about this. I think first and foremost, in terms of season extension and storage in cold climates, I'm a big fan of leaving it in the ground if I can. Um, I tend towards the lazy end of permaculture. If I can do things that take less effort, I'm much more interested in it. So I really like season extension, low polytunnels, things of that nature. I would never harvest my carrots and bring them inside. I would put a low polytunnel on them before the fall rains. And then I would go out and a meter, 3/4 of a meter of snow, go out, shovel off the snow, pull over the plastic, and pull out the sweetest, most beautiful, perfect carrots you've ever seen. One of the nice things about temperate climate brassicas and root crops is that their response to cold weather is to get sweeter so that way they don't freeze. So there's a process in which they increase the sugar content within their leaves or within their root matter to increase the sugars. So this is where you get sweet carrots, sweet kale, some of the sweeter brassicas. And I really like that approach because it leaves less for me to harvest and store. The second thing is that within a house environment, getting into storage is an important piece. And if we don't have things like basements, then what we can do is we can cordon off rooms and turn them into cold rooms using boxes with sterile sand or peat to store root veg in. Uh, and then the last piece in terms of fermentation, in terms of taking that summer bounty and turning it into winter harvest, pardon me, summer bounty, fall harvest, and then winter calories, is getting into and understanding both preservation, curing, fermentation. All of those aspects were elements within my permaculture journey that I learned after the fact. Those are what we would consider advanced permaculture skills, where permaculture is really about the design approach. And then the doing is usually going out and taking smaller workshops or finding mentors and learning those processes. So Sandor Katz, Sandor Katz, Sandor Katz's books about fermentation have been a must on my shelf. It's where I learned to do sauerkraut, kimchi. It's where I learned about water kefir, milk kefir. It's where I learned about June bug, all of these different fermentations, which, you know, pretty much the world over, you'll find fermentation as an essential part of the diet. It's one of the reasons why we can be tricked into drinking soda pop, is because of the carbonation. An ancestral feeling within us that when there's carbonation, it's good for us. There's a value to it. And then when your body gets hit with corn syrup, it's a little bit of a different story. But all of those elements really brought me into the preservation of the harvest. I can speak personally about it if you want, but like I got into hunting a couple of years ago because I was very curious and interested in making sure my meat was the highest grade possible. And if I gave you two possible meats, one that has been factory farm and one that the local ecology has raised itself, there's a conversation there about what you'd want to take home. That then brought me into an entire urban harvest. And then as I moved to the rural, a rural harvest of looking for and finding my mushroom patches, looking for and finding um, my Saskatoon berry patches where I would harvest. You know, I think my last Saskatoon harvest was about 60 or 70 pounds, and all I had to do was go out and pick for a couple of days. So I think all of that brings us into this idea of how do we take the external conversation and then learn how to preserve it so that way our harvest and the nutrition that comes from it is as potent as possible. I picked up a dehydrator a couple of years ago because I wanted to capture again and store as much as my food as possible. So I would buy in bulk from a colleague of mine who grew mushrooms. I would buy all of my mushrooms from him and Paul Stamets of Fungi Perfecti fame, and his books are incredible. If you haven't read Mycelium Running, I think it's a must for everybody. But he found out, Paul really took a look at it, that if you take most mushrooms, specifically portobellos, chanterelles, shiitake, you leave them gills up in the sun for 3 days, they go into like 1,000 to 2,000 times vitamin D. And so that was our approach to increase the amount of vitamin D we would get in the winter. We would do that, supercharge them with vitamin D, put them into the dehydrator, do some full, some cut, and then those went into glass storage where we would take out the air with these little air suckers that basically remove all the air from a jar. I hate canning. I I I despise it because it always goes into 3 in the morning. There's no way to get enough time to can enough and to do it in the right way so that way you're not working and you're just like, I hate this. I want to finish. It was like baking when I was a kid with my parents during Christmas. And so I love tomatoes, which provides a nice friction point. I would grow 480 pounds of tomatoes every year. And so I dehydrated them. And you know what? It was the best thing I've ever done because dehydrated tomatoes, you give a little bit of water, a little bit of oil, throw them into the Vitamix, and it's the best sauce you've ever tasted. It's just perfect right out of the bat because you've concentrated the flavor. So we would do that for our tomatoes. Our tomatoes were turned into paste, to sauce. They were turned into chips. So we would use our tomatoes as chips for like hummus and other bean dips we would make during the winter. Um, and then there's the whole conversation about meat curing and getting into that conversation. We would make prosciutto, which is typically a process where we cure pork, but we would do it with deer and elk. And we would create this beautiful ruby meat that was just it, saying that we were preserving it for long-term food storage is a joke because it was gone the moment it was ready. You know, it lasted a week, it was gone. But I would create biltong, which is beef jerky out of South Africa. The recipe for biltong is incredibly delicious. It's a lot of cinnamon, it's a lot of nutmeg. It's things that you wouldn't think to have on as meat, and that would be my little meat treats throughout the week. Um, and then there's all of the beans that we would harvest and dry, the squash that we would cure outside, the onions we would cure outside, and then basically because we had a basement that was cool, we could do that. But I've also converted rooms and just created sheds outside and insulated them so that way we could moderate moisture and temperature, which are the two things you have to be, and pest infiltration for things like impromptu root cellars. But you can also bury freezers, old freezers that are totally defunct. You can transform into underground chest root cellars that work just as well. We've done that as well, which has been super useful. And then in my more ambitious, less authority, less authority approving ways, we rejigged our plumbing. We created gray water oases outside of our back door. We used our laundry to feed a wetland made out of bathtubs in the backyard. I've been in places where we've done composting toilets inside the house, even though that there's a perfectly good plumbed toilet right beside it, because we wanted to capture the nutrition because of the amount of soil we were trying to build. And this is the things that people don't realize. There's an incredible amount of nutrition that passes through us. when we eat and defecate that we don't capture. So between harvesting urine, diluting urine, and using it as a nitrogen source and fertilization source in the landscape, and then working with human manure, the two sites where we did that in an urban situation, our production was insane. It wasn't even comparable to the folks around us that were buying their fertilizer in bags or bottles, because so much of that, after it's been composted well, is really potent. The number one book for that is The Human Manure Handbook by Joe Jenkins. Great bathroom reading. It's an obligatory joke. Everyone has to make it. Great book. You can find it online. It's a free PDF. He's made it available. He's also made his toilet construction out of a 5-gallon bucket called the Lovable Loo available. If you are in an urban environment, or if you're in an environment where just a bucket system's not going to cut it, The Essential Guide to Composting Toilets, written by my colleague and friend Gord Baird, is brilliant. And then we just ran a course that's now available as self-paced on regenerative living by the same name. So it was a complete deep dive into composting toilets in terms of what to choose, what to do, how to work with them. If you want to go with a batch composter, if you want to go with a rotational and electronic, all of these different approaches. So that covers those pieces. I would say from a water perspective, my first conversation, and again, we're getting into opinion now. We're definitely outside of design because there's a lot of contention, but fluoride and chlorine are not good for the human body. That's my opinion. And so I try to remove them from water sources when I'm in the city as much as possible. Sometimes that's difficult because some of the chlorines that are used, especially in European cities, are actually chloramides, and chloramides are persistent, have to be taken out with either vitamin C or colloidal silver. But I want to have the highest grade water possible, especially if I'm doing things like fermentation or compost extracts or compost teas. All of those require uncontaminated water. So I need to be able to bring that water to a high grade. Plus, when you think about the fact that we're 60, 70, 80% water, depending on who you're talking to, that's one of the major components that make us as people. And so I want to make sure that water is high grade. So being conscientious about what kind of filtration systems, what's in your water to start off with, what is the history of your pipes in terms of your city or your urban area, all of that plays into understanding, going back to the prime directive. Prime directive of permaculture is take responsibility for yourself and for that of your children. So I want to make sure that I'm at peak possible health in everything I do. So that's been a big piece, the water piece. And then if I am harvesting rainwater off of my roof, which I have in 4 different places that I've lived, it's really about being conscientious of when are we harvesting, what water are we taking in. We can get into that closer to when we get to week 5 or lesson 5, because we can get into the conversation about how to safely harvest rainwater and what to do in terms of using it for landscape versus potable use and the issues with that. But that carries water, that's food. And then I think the other thing that in temperate climes people don't realize is that we're heating this massive space. And so during the winter, I would have a small grow set up so that way we would do wheatgrass, we would do sprouts. I ran a sprouts company. We did radish, sunflower, pea. We dabble in sishu and a couple of these other boutique greens for restaurants, but pea's easy. Pea seed is cheap as chips, easy to throw into a layer of soil in a 2 centimeter, half-inch tray, easy to get LED full spectrum lights, low wattage, and grow your own greens. Inside, you're heating your house anyways. Your house is anywhere between, like, if you're like us, 17 degrees, if you're like normal people, 20, 21 degrees. So there's all that heat in there. And if you put a small enclosure around most of those elements, you can turn them into greenhouses quite easily. So we used to grow that and wheatgrass as an energetic. And then we would have usually a full herb row. We would grow all of our own herbs in the winter inside, because I want to, again, localize that as much as possible. That's food, that's storage, preservation. And then when it came to things like heating, so we, as much as possible, tried to keep the general heat within the house low, either if it was electricity or wood, and then wood heat, and then we would basically use thicker blankets. We picked these up for free from a local hotel that was like had redone all the beds and so they were giving away the comforters. And basically we would create these little boundaries in between each room that we were in. So that way we could just heat the room. We didn't have to heat the whole house because you live in a room normally. You don't live in an entire house. You move from room to room in the winter. So that was another thing. And then we usually, we moved our bed down into the main living area during the winter. So that way we didn't have to heat the upstairs as much, which was great because we were heating it during the day with wood fire as well. And that's a whole nother conversation. I could literally talk for 5 hours on wood heat and about wood fired stoves and just the value of wood heat, the value of having an area. And Jeff, who's in this class, is doing this in Poland. He's got an entire willow woodlot that he's using and being conscientious of diameter and sizing and chipping to produce heat for his site. And being able to have independent heat off grid is essential in my conversation. Not to mention, it's a nicer heat. Not to mention, if you're heating something throughout the day, it becomes where you warm up food. It's where you boil water. It's where you dry clothes. And if you then work into the conversation of water heating, which Ben Falk of Whole Systems Design is just re-releasing his book. I highly recommend his book, Resilient Homesteading or The Resilient Homestead, something like that. But Ben's got some great online courses about his wood-fired stove and his water jacket on there. That's just phenomenal. I think that's probably enough because we got 13 minutes left and I should check if there's other questions, but as you can tell, I could probably keep talking about this. Was there anything within there that you wanted me to explain further or go into, or is that good for now? And you'll propagate some questions for maybe the next time, or?
It's perfect for now. Thank
Okay.
you very much.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, you're welcome. All right. Any other questions that have popped up in that? I'm sure there's a few. Or none. My sureness is not as sure as it should be. Okay, let's jump into Basemaps. Let's talk a little bit about Basemaps as we come into it. So I've run 2 Basemap clinics Friday and Saturday. Looks like I'm going to run another one tomorrow on Tuesday at I think 11 my time. Is that what I said? I don't know. We'll send an email out, and then probably Friday. So I'm going to do 2 more. So these clinics are really if you have questions or if you want me to go through and help design and work your base map, which I've done already. There was some interest in how to use Google Earth Pro. So if in one of those we don't have as many questions, I will do a deep dive into Google Earth Pro. Also, I've extended them by 30 minutes because 1 hour was totally not enough. So let's jump into this. So first and foremost, template. Our trusty template. Most of us, hopefully by now, because we should have been submitting, will have seen the template. The 2 Basemap clinics are currently up here. So if you want to watch them or scrub through them to find the relevant pieces, you can. Finding and tracing contours is a great case study. I worked with a client or a student a couple of last year before, I don't know when this was. Similarly, rural basemap creation, we worked with Bjorn, who's in the other class, that's him. And we went through his process as well. So pretty easy to outline this process. So let's take a look at some of the major pieces. Basically, what we're trying to do is we're trying to take an aerial image of your site, and we're trying to bring all the information from that aerial image so that if we took away from the aerial image, all the information would be there. And I'm just gonna call out Belkis, who did a fantastic base map. She was on, I think, our Friday base map clinic, and it's phenomenal. I'm really looking forward to seeing it. So everybody be on the lookout for Belkis's base map next Monday when it's due. But basically, you can see in the tutorials here, and also the examples up here, we have a lot of really good base maps that we can be looking at here. So there's a fair bit of good information to go off of. But basically, what we're going to try and do is go from the ground up. So first off, we're going to grab our property boundary, and we can find that either by our deeds, by our local municipality, by our local registry office, by the people who own the site. They should have some kind of boundary. If they don't have something specific, but they're like over by that tree, then basically you go out and you basically mark on a map where it is and you make it roughly right. Because again, you don't need to get stalled at any one of these steps because you can always redefine that. Then usually we need some kind of ground cover. This is the number one reason I take away a marker 2 is there's no ground cover. So you need to have something on the ground that then shows us that this is grass lawn. Great. If you just show me white and there's nothing here that's white, nothing should ever be white because the background of the whole slide is white, then I don't know what it is. Then from there, we move up. And I like moving to contours next. So finding your contours, if you have them, if you find topographical information, again, there's a whole tutorial up here about finding accurate topographical information. So definitely look through that. If you can't find that, then Contour Map Creator or Map Equator Studios, which I haven't used, but I have looked through, and a student from last class showed it to me, and it looks really good. And the information looks of higher quality than this. Just haven't had a chance to go through it yet, but there it is. Here's a nice piece. Ensure your contours extend beyond the property boundary. So we need to see the contours going above the boundary, which is great how Andrea did this, because we have a really good sense of what the rest of the site looks like and what's the influence of that topography. If you don't have contours, then show me water flow lines. Show me where that water would flow without the contour lines. And that's fine too. That just gives us a sense of where we might put in our information. I would prefer if everybody defaulted to the horizontal title bar, but if it just makes more sense for you to work with this type of layout, then this is fine. Also, somebody in the Basemap Clinic had an issue because they needed the space up here. So if that ever happens, just go to layout and click blank and you'll remove that bar. And so you'll get a bit more space there. So that was a nice little learning from our tutorial there. Next, don't spend a bunch of time trying to go and find the perfect icon. These icons are fine. I've given folks the extra icons down here. I've shown them how to use these. They're in the tutorials, but truthfully, the more time you spent rendering this and making it look beautiful, the less time you're spending on learning the process. Circles and lines, circles and lines, circles and lines. Neil Bertrando of RT Permaculture, he really opened my eyes. I was spending days rendering my designs. I was doing watercolor. I was doing custom stencil work. It's ridiculous. It's not necessary. What we do within permaculture design is see the intersectionality of water and land and ecology, and that thinking, that cud chewing, if you will, that's what we're being paid for. We're cows being paid to chew the cud. The rendering should be as simple as possible to convey the idea and allow the client to move forward with what they're doing. It should be simple. If they want a high grade rendering, and I offer this to clients, we can do that. That's no problem. Actually, I'll pull you up. Resume share. I'll pull you up a high grade rendering that cost thousands of dollars, that was digital, that a client wanted because they were creating a big site and they had a lot of conversation to go through with it. And I'll show you what it looks like. But I can tell you, the thousands of dollars that are spent on this, totally not necessary at all. It's a lot of time, effort, and work, and it's not necessary for the end conversation at all. But I will show it to you so you can see the conversation of what you can produce if you want to get good at things like Blender or other 3D digital assets that then show the change. So I'll show these to you guys. And that really gives us a sense that if we need to, we can take these line drawings, we can send them to a professional renderer, and they can make beautiful designs like this, where we have an aerial photo of what was, and then we have almost a photorealistic photo of what is. So we can jump in here. Hold on, I'm just gonna see if I can, yeah, there we go. So this was a 160, 135 acre site, something like that. They had done a bunch of clearing already. There was a big water conversation in the back here. And basically, I laid out and also did the economics for what would then produce the highest amount of income for them in their area. And they wanted something at this grade. So that's great. We put this together. This becomes what they need to show to the board, and the board works with it, and that's great. But it's time and money. I think this was like $2,500 just for the rendering alone, because it takes a lot of time for somebody in a computer to make it photorealistic like that. And that's fine. It's easy to do. It's fine to do. You can pay for it. But as a designer, we don't need to spend that amount of time and energy. We just need to get the basics on the map so that way we can go forward. Does that make sense to everybody? Is everybody cool on that? Nobody's feeling like I'm attacking them personally because they have artistic dreams of becoming a Rembrandt on design. Okay, cool. And if you want to do so, I did it for years. I did watercolors. I did perspective renders, which is basically in the site, you create renders. One of the reasons why I like using, I don't know if it was your class or the other class, but yeah, somebody let me know if it was your class. I like the iPad because I can go take a photo and actually draw in real time what we're seeing. Was that you guys or was that the other class? You guys remember seeing that? No, I'm seeing shaking of heads. Okay. Well, maybe I'll show it next time because we're coming up to the hour. Let's go back to this. Bum, ba-dum, ba-dum. All right. So yes, start at the bottom, work your way up. Watch the tutorials. I can't say this enough. I don't understand why people come to me and say I don't know how to do it and they haven't watched the tutorials. The tutorials are point by point by point by point. Plus, we have these great case studies. Plus, we have these great Basemap clinics. You know, I don't understand why people would not watch this, but if you watch all of these and you're still frustrated, reach out to me. We'll jump on Zoom. We'll have a personal 20 minutes, and I can usually solve anybody's problems around base maps in 20 minutes. So that's the base map conversation. Any questions about the base map? Does it seem relatively straightforward? Not all of you are going to have good data. Not all of you are going to have good aerial photographs. That's just what it is. The world is not a fair place. We don't all have access to the same data. What I would recommend though, and I say it in the tutorials, go to Google Earth Pro. The number of people on the Basemap clinics who I just went to Google Earth Pro and we found better imagery. Don't use Google Earth. I say it in the tutorials. It's not good. And then they do that whole modeling of the site, also not good. Not good things. So yeah, Google Earth Pro free. I've got the link there, easy to download, easy to use, and it's got a great timeline, which we saw last time, that you can move forward and back. Client interview, we'll talk about briefly. It's a rather straightforward process. So one of the things that people can miss on the client interview is I want to know how you know this person. So are you the same? Are you a friend? Is it just somebody you picked out of the phone book? That's important. As we go through this, remember to keep up bolded highlighting. If it's multiple clients, 2 or more, then just, right click on this and go add, insert column right. That's totally fine. Every one of these little cells needs something in it. If there's nothing there, say nothing. If there's nothing desired, say nothing. If you don't put something in there, I get to say, I'm taking a mark from it and I hope you resubmit. Don't do that. Just make sure that there's something in all of these. Desired can be anything under the sun. If you insert photos, if you bring anything in from the internet, anything at all, it requires a URL and an access date. And if you don't want it on the slide, you can always make a slide that just has all of your resources, all of your citations at the end, but it needs to be there. Things the client likes most about the site, things client likes least about the site. Again, inspirational images. One of the things I did with clients that I learned from Jenna McNabb was to make a Pinterest or a Houzz, Houzz board, and then ask the client to go in there and find things they like, find interesting aspects, interesting photos. But it was great because it gave me a sense of what they were looking for. Top concerns or questions from you as the designer, and top goals for the site as you take a look at what the client wants and what you see. And then what's the overall vision? So sometimes this is a mission statement, vision statement. Doesn't matter. Again, bolded highlighting on all of these things. And that will then take us to the end. I'm seeing a chat. Hold on. Question, in case of family, do you need the answers from the young adults? No, you do not. Within values-based decision-making and holistic management, there's this idea of decision makers. And the primary decision makers have veto power. So I would say is if the person you're talking to does not have veto power, don't worry about it. They can influence the design. They're what we would call a secondary or tertiary decision maker in holistic decision making and values-based decision making. But no, they definitely don't need to be there. When I'm working with families that have kids who are 6, 7, I definitely ask them to ask the kids for input for sure. But I'm not hinging everything or stopping the design because of it. It's a good question. That's the client interview. Questions about that? Questions, comments, queries, quotations? Happy, joy? Okay. All right, folks, we are into the middle between now and next week. So next week, your assignments are due. If you have questions, javin@allpointsdesign.ca. As usual, you can ask questions at the end of your slides as well, or you can just reach out. If you need some time, that's fine as well. Thanks, everybody. We're already getting some folks that are having to jump. That's great. If you're still able to stay on and let me know what you took away from this session, that'd be great. Would love to know your thoughts. And we'll see you next week, in 2 weeks from now. Awesome.
Javan,
Yes.
can I ask, because I haven't given you my assignment 1 yet, and probably assignment 1 and assignment 2, I will finish them about the same time. You
Okay.
still want me to post assignment 1 under assignment 1 and then assignment 2 under assignment 2?
Great
Or
question.
do I put everything under assignment 2?
Each assignment is in each discussion thread.
Yeah.
So assignment 1 goes in assignment 1, assignment 2, and assignment 2. And if you ever need to resubmit, it goes under the submission of the assignment you're resubmitting. The
Yeah,
reason
okay.
for that is that's how I track everything. Because when I get onto Canvas, you probably see it too. There's a discussion thing that shows if there's new discussions, and that's how I know where to go and what to do.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Erica. Thanks,
Yeah,
Jana.
thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
It's great. See you.
Bye now.